who could surprise us in the 2025 NFL season. That and more today on the No Friends of Fantasy Football podcast. Fuzz, who will surprise us in the 2025 season?
Hello, everybody. Seth, thank you for hosting again. My guy is Justin Fields, quarterback, Jets. Um, right now, we have Justin Fields in most rankings hovering between 12 and QB 12 and 15. And the reason why I believe that Justin Fields could over exceed is the situation he's currently in with the Jets. Uh, Having Garrett Wilson, Brees Hall, and the head coach Aaron Glenn being in there. If you look at last year, he started only 6 games. He finished with a record of 4-2. He threw for 5 touchdowns. He ran for 5. Threw for over 1,100 yards and ran for almost 300. So it's a pretty decent sample size, being that he started just a few games in Pittsburgh, particularly. Considering he's going to the Jets, I feel like it's a big upgrade in that offensive system. Um, and I see him. I believe he's going to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback, due to the fact that he's both a dual threat in the passing game and the rushing game. I could see him rushing for 50, 60 yards a game, throwing for, let's say, 200. So I have high hopes for Justin Fields. I did a mock draft in some scenarios where, depending on your strategy in the mock draft, I was able to land Bijan and Gibbs and then pull around in the third round and get Justin Fields and then go really heavy on receivers. So depending on your strategy, um, have him as a QB2, potentially QB1. I think that's really good value in the third round.
Yeah, and I definitely have to agree with you on that, especially when a lot of the fantasy world is aware that the dual threat at QB is really a cheat code in fantasy football league. So anytime that a running quarterback is falling in ADP, he's definitely someone who I'd like to target. And I mean, adding on to that, definitely we're excited about the new coaching staff in New York. In addition to Justin Fields reuniting with Garrett Wilson, we
Yeah.
saw how much fantasy goodness came from Justin Fields with DJ Moore. It's probably the last time we really seen DJ Moore going off. Um, do you expect this to affect any of the backfield at all, especially with Justin Fields running the ball more? Do you think that might take away from what could be a trio backfield?
I think it'll affect it in some way, but it also will. I feel like it'll benefit Brees Hall even more, especially the fact that when they had Aaron Rodgers back there, they could stack the box, right, and try to stop Brees Hall. But in this scenario where you got a dual threat and the way they're going to design that offense, you got to watch out for both. And consider that RPO action kind of similar to what the Eagles did. You got to pick your poison, right? You either attack Justin Fields and then the ball goes to Brees, or vice versa. So I think if the coaching staff do the right thing and support Justin Fields in the right way, I feel like he will flourish. I just felt like he was in really bad situations in the previous offenses, especially with the Bears. In Pittsburgh, I don't believe he got a chance, in my opinion. Um, so I think now they're giving him the reins. He has his guy, right? Garrett Wilson. They drafted a young tight end in Mason Taylor, which, in my opinion, is the third best tight end in the draft. So I have high hopes for the guy, and I wish him well.
Do any other pass catchers from the New York Jets offense interest you at all?
Not necessarily. The departure of Devontae Adams was a hurt piece, but I view Garrett Wilson as an alpha wide receiver one that could definitely take on 150 targets a year or even more potentially. Um, you know, them drafting Mason Taylor should add another element to that, but I don't see anybody as fantasy relevant that we need to even highlight, to be honest.
Understood, understood. How about the backfield? I know we spoke about that a little bit, and I'm sorry if I'm going in circles here, but do you have a favorite amongst the three between Braylon Allen, Brees Hall, and Isaiah Davis, and even they went and drafted Donovan Edwards? Do you think there's anything to that at all?
I think Brandon Allen's is probably the only threat because of what he's shown last year. Um, in some scenarios, I feel like a lot of people are sleeping on Brees Hall due to the fact that he creeped up in that backfield and also some injury concerns. But in my opinion, I feel like Brees Hall is a superstar running back that people shouldn't be overlooking. If you look at last year, he was drafted as a top five running back, and now this year for some reason he's ranked maybe 7 or 8, which is kind of ironic.
Mm.
But I do feel like they'll probably split it. I'd say 70-30 between Brees and Allen, but I don't see anybody else being a threat and carving out any kind of like serious workloads.
No, and that's definitely fair. That's definitely fair. And one question before we move on from Justin Fields. Let's say in Dynasty, if you were to purchase Justin Fields, how, what would you be willing to trade for Justin Fields? Especially
I mean,
considering the fact that, and not just to play devil's advocate, if this year does not go well, does not go the way Justin Fields would want it to go, I mean, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but it would be fair to say this could be one of his last chances in the NFL.
yeah, I think I'm gonna have to agree with you, Seth. I feel like this is a prove it year, so it is a bit of a risk. It is a bit of rolling the dice. So that kind of hinders his value in a trade, and a smart fantasy owner could use that as leverage. Uh, but if you really believe in his ability and also his age, because I believe he's only 24, 25, correct me if I'm wrong, but if he hits, you're golden. So for me, I'd agree, if you're in need of a quarterback, I'd get as aggressive as late first round pick if you have one, or like 2 second round picks. That's kind of where I see his value, especially in super flex dynasty leagues.
Yeah, and that's definitely fair. And just to repeat to the audience out there, No Friends in Fantasy Football podcast is centered around Superflex IDP leagues. So that's why you hear these types of prices for Justin Fields. And I can go off the rails right now and go into my debate about one quarterback leagues and two quarterback leagues and Superflex leagues, but I'll leave that for another day. Um, but but kind of adding on to you there, Fuzz. Somebody who I'm actually high on this offseason is Trevor Lawrence, and I expect a big year from him in 2025. Really, because especially at this time of the year in May, we want to look for the offenses that we expect to overperform, right? So that way we could shoot our darts really anywhere on that board and hope that as that offense overperforms, the pie kind of gets larger. And what better player to take than the nucleus of it all? So I'm high on Trevor Lawrence. We're really high on the receiving core, right? Brian Thomas, Travis Hunter. We're also high on the running backs, whether it is you're high on Trevor Etienne or if you think Bashaw Tutin will emerge. Because of that, I'm really interested in buying into this offense.
Let me ask you a question about that, Seth.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say Trevor Lawrence plays 16 games and Travis Hunter is who we think he is, and we all know what Brian Thomas Jr. is. Give me an estimate. How many yards, how many touchdowns, and where do you think he finishes in the overall QB ranking at the end of the year?
And that could vary, right? So 2 years ago, I was looking at Trevor Lawrence like a surefire thing, and it feels like this excitement around the Jaguars' offense. a lot of people don't want to hear this, but I feel like it's a repeat episode from the Urban Meyer days. Going into that offseason, extreme excitement, season started, not the same thing. I know that's not the case with James Gladstone there and Balky not being in the building anymore, and I know that's not the case with Liam Cohen. Um, so I do expect this offense to be a little bit more explosive. Um, I I hope this doesn't bite me, but I hope to see Trevor Lawrence over 3,000 yards, um, over 30 touchdowns, or give or take somewhere around that range. But I definitely expect him, if everything lines up with Travis Hunter, I expect Trevor Lawrence to be a top 5 QB, if not in the top 7, because that whole running factor is not a case with him. He doesn't run.
Yeah, no, that's great. I feel like 3,000 is a little low, but
So
um,
where would you put him at?
um, I could see him getting, being right around the 4,000 yard marker. In a good year, if I feel like he is going to have a good year, I could see him throwing 30 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. Um, so that's kind of my prediction
Yeah,
with
and
Trevor Lawrence.
that's definitely you're
Only
more ballsy than
only
me.
if he plays the full season, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
we gotta hope he stays on the field.
Yeah, and that definitely is the case with him.
Knock on
So
wood.
so he does it. So I mean, curiously, so what are your thoughts on someone like Matthew Stafford? Being that we are talking about QBs, is he someone that excites you? What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I love Matthew Stafford. I know he's getting there up in age, right? He had a good year last year. He threw for almost 4,000 yards, 20 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. He did play 16 games. Cooper Kupp fell off. His primary guy was Puka Nakua. So didn't really have much of a supporting cast beyond Puka Nakua. So with the addition of Devontae Adams, oh my God, what an ad! Uh, that offense is going to be unstoppable, in my opinion. I do feel like they might even win their division. Um, so I have high hopes for Matthew Stafford. Right now, he's ranked as like the QB 23. So you literally can get him for dirt, stash him as a QB2, even as a backup. But like I said, if you look at the value of where he's going and where he could potentially be, I think it's a no-brainer. You have to. And being in the Sean McVay offense, they get creative, and I can't imagine what they're going to do with Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua. I'm just super excited and also scared at the same time, being an Eagles fan. Uh, but yeah, Matthew Stafford, he still got it, man. He's what 30, 36, 37.
Yeah, I could look up his age. I don't know exactly how old he is, but he's definitely up there.
Yeah, and last year another thing we forgot to even talk about. He played with broken ribs towards the end of the year, so that also, like, if he would have had a full 16 games healthy, the guy could have threw for 4,500 and more than 20 touchdowns.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
he's a guy got people have to keep their eye on and try to target him.
Yeah, and if this kind of goes back to also what I was saying about Trevor Lawrence, I'm not sure what the current ADP is for Devonte Adams, but I know Puka Nakua should be at least wide receiver 1 or 2 behind Jamar Chase. So same thing. Something's not right here. We're taking the receivers, we're taking all the weapons way ahead of the guy getting the ball to them, the center of all those fantasy points. So definitely an offense you want to target, a quarterback you want to target. Curiously, just kind of staying on the Rams for a second here, are there any outside of, I mean, do you expect this to be just straight Devontae Adams and Puka Nakua, or do you expect anybody else in this offense as far as the pass catchers to be involved?
Yeah, no, I do feel like they'll have roles. I know Tutu Atwell's been, seeing the field a lot. I think, they'll probably use him around in the slot. They did draft Terrence Ferguson. Not sure what kind of role he's going to get as a rookie, but eventually, this might not obviously factor in with Stafford, especially if he doesn't see the field this year. But, I do think that what I envision, in my opinion, next year. Uh, Last year they kind of gave a full workload to carry on Williams, which he was really good, but you want to keep him healthy. They drafted Blake Corum, in the second or third round, he really didn't see the field at all. I personally drafted him hoping, he would get some touches and get a glimpse of what he could do since he was highly recruited. And he did really well in Michigan. So I do see, him seeing some touches and kind of alleviating Kyren Williams. There's going to be a lot of play action, bootleg, and you just don't know where the ball's going to go, right? It could be Devontae Adams, it could be Puka Nacua. Pick your poison.
Oh, 100%. So, I mean, with that being the case, and with you being somebody who drafted Blake Corum last year, are you buying in on Jaquez Hunter?
I think you have to, only because they drafted another running back, which was kind of weird in my opinion. But with Sean McVay, it's kind of tricky, right? Like when you look at running backs, you really got to look at how these coaching staff deploy them, right? And will this guy even see the field, right? I drafted Blake Corum thinking he's going to see the field, and he didn't see the field at all, very barely, right? But like a coach like Liam Cohen, right? You saw what Bucky Irvin did. Um, Rashad White had a career year the year prior. They drafted Bucky. They saw what he can do, and then once they got a glimpse of his capabilities, they gave Rashad White the back seat. But with Sean McVay, we don't know that. He's totally different. So it's really unpredictable. But I think Jaquiz Hunter eventually, he's a stash. If you want to take a dart throw towards the end of the draft, especially in redraft, he's going to be like a lottery pick in my opinion. But in dynasty, he's someone definitely everyone should be targeting.
Yes, yes. No, 100% definitely something I agree with you on. Kind of sticking with the theme, somebody who I'm actually high on as well. I know a lot of people who aren't in Superflex are probably sick of the quarterback talk, but Michael Penix. I mean, kind of going on that same theory with Matthew Stafford and Trevor Lawrence, in terms of we're taking the pass catchers earlier, and I know a lot of people aren't biting the Kyle Pitts bullet. We could get we could get into that shortly. But if there's ever been a year for and I know we're gonna talk about Kyle Pitts in a second, but if there's ever been a year for him to break out, it would be right now. Same thing, Michael Penix. I mean, we saw him come in last year. He looked. I would give him a C. How about that? A C in terms of fantasy points and everything. But if you are a manager who is high on J.J. McCarthy, but not high on Michael Penix, you're looking at the whole thing wrong. J.J. McCarthy didn't get a redshirt year. He was injured that whole year. Michael Penix sat on the bench. He actually got out on the field. He played a little bit of football. Now he gets a whole offseason to really let it soak in. So I'm high on Michael Penix and the Falcons offense as a whole, to be honest with you. How do you feel
Yeah.
about that, Fuzz?
I mean, listen, I love Michael Penix. I love Drake London. They drafted him top 10 for a reason, right? They believed in the guy. He has a rocket of an arm, and he just delivers the ball in such a beautiful way. If you carefully watch some of the highlights of last year, ball placement, he made some of the toughest throws. And as a rookie, you have to look at that, right? And he started what, like the last 4 games, 5 games. So just imagine a full off season with Drake London, Bijan behind him. You got Darnell Mooney. I'm hoping Kyle Pitts bounces back. I mean, listen, everyone's been hoping, right? But if there's an upgrade at QB, and Kyle Pitts is a freak of nature, they have to find ways to get him the ball. So if I'm gonna just throw a dart and give a prediction, I do see Penix in the realms of 3,500 on the high end, 3,500 yards, 22 to 23 touchdowns around there. Doesn't really give us that much of upside in the rushing game, but he can run if he needs to, but he's not a Justin Fields where he can take it to the house. Uh,
100%.
but he has that sneaky capability of escaping the pocket. And yeah, so I think he's definitely someone that, for value reasons, right? We're
Yeah.
talking value here. He's a good target for value.
So that you made a fair point there. And considering that, kind of, okay, so I'm going to give you two different scenarios. You're on the clock, or you're in the situation. Are you choosing Cam Ward or are you choosing Michael Penix?
That's a good one.
Yeah,
I'm
just to
not
give
gonna
everyone
lie.
a pulse here, like giving them an idea of what to.
All right, in redraft, in redraft, right? We're talking redraft. I have to go with Penix
Mhm.
because I've seen a glimpse of what he could do. When we're drafting rookies, it's really an unknown. And the biggest example was Rosen. What's his name?
Josh Rosen?
Yeah, he went to the Cardinals, and he was, they talked all about him in college, and he said he was going to be the best quarterback ever, and he was a bust. So I tread very lightly when we talk about rookies because at the end of the day, they're rookies. You can fall in love as much as you want, but if they don't translate to the real life speed of the NFL, they're nothing, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for me, I'm going Penix only because I've seen his play style, I've seen what he could do, I know his supporting cast. I have to go Penix.
So who would you choose between him and Justin Fields?
I'll probably go Justin Fields.
You'd go
Only
Justin Fields.
because, yeah, the only reason why, and hear me out. Um, Justin Fields rushing upside's insane, right? So when we look at fantasy, what can win you a game? If a quarterback goes bonkers and rushes for 100 yards and rushes for 2 touchdowns and throws for 200, that right there you won, right? So for someone like Penix to match those numbers, he needs to throw for 370 yards. He needs to throw for 4 touchdowns. So it's kind of hard, right, to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But Justin Fields has the capability of doing that any game. So I would go with the upside. I'm a gambler, so I'm going with the guy that can
Yeah.
do big things, if you
Now,
know what I mean.
that's definitely fair. So kind of just sticking with the Falcons for a second, not to get stuck in there. But I mean, as far as Kyle Pitts, I mean, where do you stand with him? Is he someone you're excited about, or?
So I'm excited only because I feel like there's an upgrade at quarterback. Um, Kirk Cousins, whatever happened to him, I don't know, but he just fell off the face of the earth, and even the Falcons were willing to bite the bullet on him and eat the contract, and most likely they're gonna get rid of him. But I do feel like with the upgrade at Penix, Kyle Pitts. I always believed in Kyle Pitts coming out of college. It's just one of those players, right, where they're just in a bad scenario. They don't design plays for them, and it's just unfortunate, right? 'Cause it's just a waste of talent. When you look at some of those athletic tight ends, good offensive coordinators are finding ways to get them open, finding ways, designing plays in the red zone for them. That never happened with Kyle Pitts. Um, I do feel like this offense is going to be totally revamped with Michael Penix, and that's the reason why I'm really hopeful for Kyle Pitts. So, what do you think, Seth?
Yeah, so I'm on the fence with Kyle Pitts, right? Where I'm typically when it comes to redraft and dynasty drafts, um, I typically punt tight end unless it's like a no-brainer for me, but I'm typically pushing it off to the later end, right? So because of that, especially with Kyle Pitts' ADP where it's at, I would take a risk on him in the later rounds. But some of my skepticism about him, and I was excited about him as a rookie, right? So let's keep in mind one thing with the tight end position, especially as rookies, it takes more time to get acclimated because they're learning two different positions. They're learning the blocking end of it and being an offensive weapon part of it. Um, but the second question I asked myself, so it looks like, and I'm with you on this Kyle Pitts, and he was someone who deep down I know I'm high on, but I ask myself, are we making excuses for Kyle Pitts? I mean, a couple years ago, I was saying it's the Arthur Smith offense. Arthur Smith. And then he went to the Steelers and messed that whole thing up. But I'm blaming it on Arthur Smith. While Arthur Smith was the coordinator and Desmond Ritter was the quarterback, Janu Smith was going off. So, Janu Smith was able to perform in this and not Kyle Pitts. Okay, maybe that was a one-off. Janu Smith went to another offense and continued that on with the Miami Dolphins. So I'm not really sure where to stand with Kyle Pitts, but this is definitely his last year, and I do feel like we are making excuses for him as a community. I say that as someone who is high on him. Am I saying anything wrong, or what are your thoughts? Do I make
So,
sense?
so let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
In your opinion, since you kind of like don't favor tight ends as much, what is a good tight end season in your opinion, statistic wise?
Tight end. Look, Fuzz. After we get past tight end 4, it's a wasteland. A lot of
Okay, so
times
so what is a good season for a tight end?
I'm trying to get someone who's going to be tight end 1, tight end 2, and
Okay,
that's
what
what
is
we
that?
thought.
Like,
We
is that
thought
1,000 yards? Is that 10
over. Yeah,
touchdowns?
well, 1,000 yards would be a miracle for a tight end. So 1,000
Well, what
yards.
is the floor for a tight end? Let me hear it.
Okay, so the floor for every tight end would be you. When we think about Kyle Pitts, we were sold this vision of this freak of nature. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, no, I get it.
who would be a wide
So
receiver. So yeah, 800 yards and less than 10 touchdowns would be good. You get what I
so
mean?
last year Kyle Pitts finished with 600 yards, 4 touchdowns, which is very bad, like you said, but he only had 12 red zone targets. So if you think about that, how many red zone targets, how many red zone possessions do you think the Falcons had last year? I would say in every game, maybe three at least, right?
Well, I,
So
I
I
didn't want
just
to
don't,
ballpark it. There was a streak there where they were really hot with Kirk Cousins.
and I get it. Drake London is there, but still, I feel like if they target him in the red zone, if he can get his touchdowns to 8 or 9, if he can get 700 to 800 yards, he's in top 7 tight end discussions. So, like you said, value wise, I feel like he is a good dart throw, and he could pay off when it comes to value. But
But what's tight end 7? Right? Like at the end of the day, what does tight end 7 even mean? Like, is that Britton Strange? Or am I better off taking Britton Strange from the Jags, who's another offense who we're higher on? You get what I'm trying to say, right? Like,
yeah, no, I
that's
get
next
it.
to
I get it.
at a certain point in the tight end rankings, it just falls off a cliff. Just like with Travis Hunter, Kyle Pitts draft, kind of taking you guys
Yeah,
down memory lane. We thought that he was going to be You know what I mean? Like he was supposed to change the whole game.
he sure was,
It
man.
was supposed to be like Travis Hunter thing. You know what I mean? So that's just where my skepticism comes from. I'm also high on him. My problem is in fantasy, I play both ends, right? Where I'll sell myself the good side and the bad side, and then torture myself with a decision.
Uh
But speaking of earlier, how we were talking about with Ricky Fever. Man,
huh.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word right, but when it comes to Ricky Fever, a lot of times we're forgetting about the veterans. You know what I mean? And kind of
Yeah.
transitioning a bit from tight end to running back, and specifically Javonte Williams. He's someone I'm actually excited for in the Cowboys' backfield. I know they just drafted Jaden Blue, who's stolen a lot of the spotlight, but I mean, just body type wise, and I've seen this episode 100 times. It ends up being the veteran back that gets the carries. But I mean, how would you feel about something like that, Fuzz? What are your thoughts on the Cowboys backfield?
Um. So the Cowboys, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, but next year, well, this year, I just don't know about Javonte Williams. He had his chance in Denver, and they had a good, decent O line. They weren't the best, but they were decent. They had Bo Nix. He couldn't do it. But am I saying he won't do it in Dallas? No, he could. He won't get it. He's gonna get the crack, right? This is full transparent. He is gonna get a shot. Will he exceed? I don't know. Will Jaden Blue see the field? I think he will. But I believe um, Dallas's defense is, as you saw last year, pretty bad. They made some additions, but I still think they will struggle. And I feel like that offense, especially with the addition of Pickens, is going to be pass first, pass heavy. They're down, um, and they're going to be slinging that ball, which for Javonte Williams' value, I see him more of as a touchdown dependent type of running back, right? We're hoping he sees the end zone, he rushes for 50, 60 yards. That's kind of where I see him.
Hmm.
Uh, well, I'm wondering, how you seem like you're high on him. Do you feel like he'll do a 360 and be a totally different player, or do you expect almost the same? Let me hear your thoughts, Seth.
Well, I don't expect a totally different player. I expect a slightly better version than he was last year in terms of there was a few times last year, and it was evident in our redraft league. A couple times I started over Estime, right? But there was a few
Yeah.
times where Sean Payton would just come out and literally tell the media, like, basically Javonte Williams is benched and we're gonna move forward with other running backs, and then Javonte Williams would come in there, and I'd see that human factor. And a game that comes to mind is the Saints game, where he'd go absolutely ballistic, and it showed me that the guy was motivated. You know what I mean? You know what's even more demotivating? After a game like that, your head coach saying, "Yeah, but we want to give the other guys a chance." And that's literally what happened after going.
So where can a fantasy player expect to get Javonte Williams in drafts?
The
Tell me about that,
only
sir.
I'm only interested in him late in drafts. In Dynasty, I'm not buying him for more than a third round pick. So,
Okay.
because you got to bake in the cost of the risk of being wrong, right? But if I see Jaden Blue going at an ADP that I cannot afford, or I'm not willing to sacrifice, or there's better players, more reliable and trustworthy players I can count on, that I'm gonna skip out on Jaden Blue. I'm gonna let one of my league mates get Jaden Blue, and I'm gonna go get Javonte Williams, because no matter what, I don't see this as a workhorse backfield. No matter what, I think. Would you agree, Fuzzy? Fuzz? Do you think this would be a contender?
Yeah, no, I kind of agree. So you got to kind of, it's like a toss up, right? Like, would you rather a veteran or a rookie, right? And how far do you want to reach for that rookie? So like if you want to play the cautious game, you go Javante Williams because he is going to get a crack at it first.
Hmm.
So I agree with you, Seth. But if you don't mind, I want to keep the topic in the Dallas. Um,
With Pickens, I wanted to ask you about him.
yeah, like Lawman is probably gonna think I'm trying to whammy his team. I'm not. He offered me Pickens in a trade earlier, but I declined when he was in Pittsburgh. But the new landing spot is super intriguing. Um, Even in Pittsburgh, like he had 16 yards per reception. Last year he had 900 receiving yards and unfortunately 3 touchdowns, right? But we all know the situation he was in. And as I mentioned, being in Dallas, right across from CeeDee Lamb, where he's double teamed, I think they're both going to benefit from each other. He's a vertical deep threat guy, right? He could beat you deep. He could burn DBs, and in the red zone, so that he's easily gonna get 8 touchdowns, maybe 10, right? Because you can't double team both, right? Um, he's a super talented. He's a freak of nature. If you see some of his catches, watch the Ravens game. That's one game that he went bananas, and for some reason he always goes bananas on them. But as I said, I feel like they're going to be down a lot. They're going to be throwing, and as long as Dak stays on the field, that that offense is going to be. They're going to put up points. I'll tell you that.
Mhm.
And
No,
he's someone that we should be targeting, right? Wide receiver 3. I think that's where he's going right now. But he has the potential to be a wide receiver 1. I'm just saying that.
wait, what's his ADP right now? Do you know?
Right now, I don't know, but I'll tell you in a second.
Yeah, but he's not going as a third wide receiver. That's not what you meant.
No, no,
Oh,
I
okay.
meant
I was
like
gonna say, wait,
like
what?
like
Yeah,
not a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 3.
yeah. This is gonna come as a shock. And so, two things. He earlier when Fuzz was speaking, he referenced our fantasy leagues. I actually hope they're not tuning in. And I think I'm on an island with this take because it feels like I'm the only one that sees it this way, and I really don't want it to come out. I don't want my league to know how I feel
Can
about
I
it.
can I just add
Yes.
what receivers are ahead of him in ADP?
Yeah.
Calvin Ridley, Jordan Addison, Travis Hunter, Jawan Jennings, Khalil Shakir, Jameson Williams, Chris Olave, Chris Godwin, Jalen Waddle, and Cortland Sutton.
The
There's
only
more,
one
but
that gives me pause, the only two are Chris Olave because of the Tyler Show situation, which might actually be better for him because not getting thrown medicine balls per Michael Thomas. um, and Jalen Waddle just because I'm not high on the Dolphins this season, you know?
so
But
you're telling me you like Khalil Shakir over him, you like Jawan Jennings over him, you like Calvin Ridley over him. Okay.
Calvin Ridley, I don't know. But most of those names, yes. So this is like the unpopular take, I feel, but just like I've referenced before where I've seen this episode before, and I've been intimately paying attention to the NFL for 16 years. And I don't know when everyone's going to catch on to this trend that when the Steelers come knocking on your door trying to give you a wide receiver, you tell them, get out of here. You know, even the presser after the trade, they sounded like good riddance. It wasn't even, it was like, hey, we need a fresh start. It was get the heck out, you know, and
Yeah.
the Cowboys being so if the 49ers were buying, if the Broncos were buying, there are certain organizations, and maybe I'll be talking about the Jags like that after this season. There's
So are you
certain
more concerned
organizations,
about character or the player? Is that what you're saying?
Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, Antonio Brown, Martavius Bryant, Marcus
You're
Wheaton.
right. You're right. You're right. Yeah, there is a bit of a bad streak, but I think he snaps it.
What did you see with his on-the-field conduct that would tell you he's any different than those guys I just mentioned?
No. I feel like I get all that, but as a player, as an athlete, he's athletically gifted, and I feel like he's in a good offense with a good quarterback.
And,
That's what I'm saying.
and
Value
I
wise,
hear you on
I'm
that.
taking his value.
I hear you on that. But a lot of times, too, right, when we're taking these players, this is my argument. You know, it's good for us to have some back and forth here. So when I'm taking these players, I'm oftentimes taking it like, do I trust this organization? Do I trust this organization to do good with the player? You know, because a lot of times we'll see people get drafted and that's it. You know what I mean?
You're right.
Um,
I agree.
do I trust the Cowboys? Well, let me check on Jonathan Mingo. Let me see how that trade worked out for the Cowboys. You know what I mean?
That
Oh,
was
let me check on the Trey Lance trade. Give me a second. Hold on. Because this organization is so smart. You get what I mean? That they
all
let
right. But
Rico
do you
Dowdle
feel?
walk
How
and
about
they signed
Seth,
Javonte Williams. I look at Rico Dowdle and Javonte Williams like this.
all right. Before we wrap up, I'm gonna leave it at this.
But
Right.
do I make a good point, though?
You make a very good point, to be honest, because with every risk, there's potential reward. In fantasy, you have to take risks, right? You have to. Sometimes you have to overlook these things. But what I'm saying is, personally, I'm taking Pickens over Ridley. I'm taking Pickens over Jawan Jennings. I'm taking Pickens over Chris Olave. I'm definitely taking him over Chris Godwin, especially after last year's injury. I'm taking him over all these guys because if he can, my prediction, perform, he will exceed all these guys. And I see him hovering around wide receiver 15 to 20 range. That's where I see him.
So do you expect week 1 Eagles versus Cowboys to be a shootout?
No, we're gonna. I feel like Pickens is gonna have a good game because we're gonna shut down CD Lamb.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go with my last player. Well, I could go with two here, right? So one player, definitely sometimes I like to pay attention to some of the offseason narratives, right? And one ongoing narrative is James Cook's beef with the Bills. You know,
I
because of
love that.
that,
I love that.
yeah, and he's going into the final year of his contract. It would make sense to me, and I say this with some pause because I see some hesitation. I mean, I've seen this not happen before, but it would make sense for the Buffalo Bills to try to rely more on Ray Davis this season at certain points to see what they have in him and if they could move forward with him as the RB1. From the best of my knowledge, from as far as their draft picks and UDFAs, they didn't take any notable running backs, and there was a
You're right.
lot of running backs. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
the replacement for James they could pay him. They could, but I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was a little bit ridiculous. It was more like Saquon Barkley money than
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Another player who I'm hesitant to speak about, just because. So speaking about the Steelers as a whole, if Aaron Rodgers doesn't sign with the Steelers, and even if he does, I'm never going to be really high on them. You know, and when I'm thinking players that I want to overperform, I want to be an offense that I'm excited about. But with that being said, assuming Mason Rudolph is the starter for Pittsburgh
Oh
Steelers.
God.
Hey, by the way, hold on. Can I pause for a second? And not to get into talk about our fantasy league, but did you see that pickup from Mo Willie today, Mason Rudolph? I did not even know he was on the waiver wire. Did you?
I didn't either.
I was like, oh, that's a good pickup. But anyway, so if Mason Rudolph is the starting quarterback for Pittsburgh, then I'm a little optimistic for Pat Freiermuth, right? Now let's rewind back to when we were talking about Kyle Pitts, and we were saying that the tight end position usually takes a few years because you're learning two positions in one. You know, that's one reason why Kyle Pitts will give me pause, because like, hey, did it finally click? Look how many years it took Jonnu Smith to click. You know what I mean? So with that being said, I feel the same way about Pat Freiermuth. In addition to that, so another tight end I'm secretly high on, Chiga Konkwu. I think he'll be a future in the NFL. But if you rewind to the end of last season, weeks 15 through 17, when Mason Rudolph was starting for the Tennessee Titans, he heavily targeted Chiga Konkwu. With that being said, Mason Rudolph was actually performing well in those games.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward, now he's on the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team who I'm actually also secretly high on Kelvin Austin too, by the way. But I don't expect Kelvin Austin to get anything good out of this QB room. I could see Pat Freiermuth used as a safety blanket and someone who Mason Rudolph or even Will Howard would rely on during the season.
Yeah, no, I definitely. I'm not a fan, but I could see that security blanket and the PPR. You know, heavily targeting the tight end, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mason Rudolph, I'm not a fan of. That Steelers offense is going to be atrocious. I feel so bad for whoever's catching the ball. DK Metcalf.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, it's exciting. There's a lot more players that we could have talked about, guys. But I think, you know, when we look at value, depending on what your strategy is in fantasy, and some of the gambles people are willing to take, I think the guys that we talked about today are some really good ones, and I'm hoping you guys, took that in and hopefully that, don't use it against us and take my player.
No, 100%, 100%. Fuzz, thank you for being here with us today and making some time. Until next time, everyone, please like, share, comment, and subscribe.
Let's go.
All right, I'll see you.